Thanks for staying with us on the program this morning. Let's get straight into the dialogue. Joining us virtually to review the headline stories together with me this morning is the the editor-in-chief of the Daily Courier, the ever-mercurial Seun Oni, who joins us virtually from Abuja. Hello, good morning to you, Mr. Seun, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mr. Brian. Thank you for having me on the show this morning. Always a delight.
It's a pleasure as well. Let's get straight into the conversations and starting, quite coincidentally, with your newspaper's headline following the distribution of over 10,000 kits in Enugu, which held yesterday by the First Lady, Senator Oluremi Tinubu. Nigeria has set a target your headline calls ambitious in its bid to cut maternal mortality by 20% before the year 2027. And let's get the perspective into this headline story and the possibility of achieving this quite ambitious target.
Thank you. Quite ambitious. We decided to coin it because of the backdrop of the prevalence of maternal mortality in Nigeria. Nigeria, as it's where today, has the highest burden of maternal mortality on the continent of Africa. And that is a sad situation because it's been like that for consistently over 2 decades, and successive administrations had actually paid what I would call lip service. Huge sums of money are usually allocated, but at the end of the day, very minimal progress is made. Yesterday, we saw more like a commitment that is matched with a timeline, because that's usually the missing puzzle before now. A whole lot of resources is put in, so much of effort is put on the line, but timeline when we should begin to see results so that the CSOs who are in that space could monitor implementation and also know how far we are trying to achieve those goals. Don't forget also that health, of course, is part of the global SDG to ensure that we reduce the burden of maternal mortality, where we don't have our women losing their lives during delivery the way we are having. And it's a very sad situation.
Now, Mr. Seun, you've raised two important points here. The first is UNICEF statistics of Nigeria's burden of maternal mortality. We're told it is indeed 10% of the global deaths. Now, talking about timelines, 2027, you would recall that last year as well, the federal government also made a pledge to affording expectant mothers free cesarean section where needed. I don't know, in terms of implementation, do you have facts to back how well we have come beyond that commitment to the number of women who have benefited from this federal government initiative?
Thank you for taking our discourse in that direction. I was about also highlighting that we have never had a situation when the health sector as it were does not have what it calls plans to whittle down the burden of maternal mortality. Last year, like you rightly pointed out, there were plans, there were executive orders, what you call policy statements, that mandate all federal facilities to give some what you call subventions to women who are coming there to have their antenatal and eventually delivery of their wards. But there is a palpable fear everywhere. From our research, we did an exclusive a few months ago. We discovered that even though these services are there, people still don't have confidence in the ability of these facilities to be able to give them the type of services that will guarantee their health and the health of their about to be delivered baby. there was a particular story that was a bit touching. The woman said why she was pregnant with the first baby, she was registered in one of the federal facilities here in the FCT. But on the day of delivery, the nurses, it got to a time there was a complication. The nurses who were on call, the complication began around past 11 p.m. The nurses on call made frantic effort to reach out to the medical doctor, of course the gynecologist who was supposed to come and save the situation. They made the calls up to like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. No person came inside. Even though the person picked the call after the immediately after the first dial, he did not show up. He said they had to transfer her to a private medical center at past 3 a.m. the following morning. She was lucky enough to be alive, but the baby was not that fortunate. So she now asked me, because I was part of the team who went on that scoop, and she asked me the question, we are the one, will I allow my sister or my wife to return back to that type of a facility? So a paucity of confidence in federal, public health facilities. Even though government made that commitment, many people don't want to go due to the track record of negligence. Of course, we have in the news the FMC in Abuja here, where somebody got an accident victim or a number of accident victims and ferried them to the hospital, and we saw it was everywhere on the social media at the level of negligence, the level of carelessness and delay that we saw there. So that is an issue I think they need to deal with beyond just making policy statements. But like I did mention earlier, the fact that they've added a timeline to it now makes it very easy to follow up, especially for people who are on that space, to follow up and ask questions. If by 2027 we will be reducing this deficit by the percentage that was stated yesterday, then by next year, we should see appreciable progress. By 2026, we should see a more determined effort to wrap up that number. And that, for me, is the pause from the statement yesterday.
Now, and before we move on to the next issue of discourse this morning, the 10,000 kits distributed in Enugu was particularly targeted at frontline workers in the rural area, nurses and midwives. Considering Enugu has been on the front burner in terms of transformative change under Governor Peter Obi, how much of this can become a template for replication across primary healthcare centers in the 774 local government areas?
A beautiful question there, because the sad analogy I drew earlier happened in the FCT. We had a number of people in the cities, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano, and a number of the city centers who had a similar experience. Now imagine what the experience will look like in the rural areas, where, of course, you don't have experienced doctors, you don't have very experienced midwives across all the health facilities in the rural areas. That just tells you that this maternal mortality we are talking about, the highest burden is actually from the rural areas. So I was excited yesterday when the intervention was targeted at the people in the rural areas. Like the woman I mentioned, I quoted earlier, she was able to quickly run to a private facility because she was in the city. But in the rural areas, all they had in most cases are the government facilities. They don't have the luxury of having a well-equipped private facility. And in fact, most times, most of the private facilities you have in rural areas are manned by quack medical practitioners. I was in my home state it was last year, and I was with my mom when someone came to give her minerals, these mineral drinks and little chops. So she was asking, what was this? I was asking my mom what was this meant for, and she told me that somebody was doing graduation from is it auxiliary nursing or something. So that was the first time we hear that you can go and learn some of those things, like you're learning tailoring and you are learning not in the formal government approved schools. So those are the type of people you have in the rural areas handling things like that. So it's a good one, and I just hope, like we always say on this show, the spotlight must not always be on the federal government. Let us also see how governors we copy by leave from this type of a thing, and ensure that at the minimum lives are not lost unnecessarily during delivery across the length and breadth of the country.
Well, thank you, Mr. Seun. Well, let's move on to the next issue in the news, and it's quite the contrast of views. Whilst over time we've discussed the need for opposition to prefer alternative solutions to the issue on ground, the Labour Party's presidential candidate in 2023's general election, Mr. Peter Obi, had asked questions on the transparency of the figures that are being banded by the presidency following the fuel subsidy removal. We're told, firstly, that in the last 2 years, over 84 billion naira had been saved. Now, he was also talking about his approach towards floating of the naira and subsidy removal. He used the word that he wouldn't have done it haphazardly. This morning, the presidency is replying, Mr. Peter Obi, that he has shallow knowledge of economics and governance. How do you view this back and forth between Mr. Obi and the presidency?
My position had always been having alternative positions on issue in a democracy is healthy. I am clearly in support of Mr. Peter Obi's penchant to always question the rationale behind government decisions, especially a decision as subsidy remover that has far-reaching implications on the generality of Nigerians. The economic situation we find ourselves today was occasioned in part by the removal of the fuel subsidy and the attempt to converge the exchange rates. As laudable as these initiatives have been from highly reputed global institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Funds, and several other international agencies, the impact on those of us who are in the country had been far from being stellar. And so, any resources that comes from this type of effort, of course, it is just good and appropriate, since the People's Democratic Party, that are supposed to be the leading opposition political parties, are in tatters as we speak. It is good that we have someone like Mr. Peter Obi always been in the spotlight. For a while, we have seen Vice President Atiku Abubakar a bit silent. He's always also been very vocal, criticizing, critiquing, asking the much needed question. But in a democracy, it's just good and proper that questions should be asked, or else we'll just have a society that is run autocratically. On the other side, I think I disagree when he started raising the issue of they would have removed the subsidy in a different manner. I think it's just an afterthought. What all the leading presidential aspirants leading to the 2023 presidential election said, I think they are in public domain. They are not hidden. Every one of them, practically, except for the SDP candidate, said the same thing about subsidy removal. They were very clear about what they were going to do. In fact, Peter Obi was one of the people who used the term from day one that he's going to remove subsidy. and now saying that he would have removed it, but maybe try to stagger it. He will not do it haphazardly. I was a bit elated because the person who was anchoring the interview session did a follow-up to try to clarify what he meant by he wouldn't have done it haphazardly. Unfortunately, he was not able to add any serious substance to what he meant by I won't do it haphazardly. Maybe in the coming days, I will better educate the public on what he meant. And the federal government, of course, maybe they can learn a few things to help them adjust the trajectory that they are going currently.
Now, Mr. Seun, the NOA has credited fuel subsidy removals for $84 billion savings. It has also said that this has aided the federal government in executing the flag off of 40 major road constructions in the country. Now, if you're a judge post-subsidy, some of these credits that the NOA is accrediting to the removal of fuel subsidy, would you say that it has indeed been reflective in the amount of transformation, both in infrastructure and in terms of improved quality of life for Nigerians?
I was spot on. The credits from the removal of the fuel subsidy and exchange convergence is not actually lost to any truthful analyst on our economic journey. We are coming from a place where for at least 10 years before 2023, we were in a very dire economic situation. I mean, not just the immediate past president, Muhammadu Buhari's 8 years. During the last 2-3 years of President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, of course, we had then people like Okonjo-Iweala, people like Soludo, people like the current Emir of Kano. They were very vocal in their criticism of the books of the federal government under the Goodluck administration. That we have gotten to a point where we were spending the future of the country. We were borrowing to pay salaries. And of course, entering into Buhari's administration, we had a similar thing. The only difference is that he had a longer bandwidth to be able to take some of the decisions that the incumbent is now taking head on, but he refused, in his own estimation and from maybe the economic ideas he received, was that Nigerians would be seriously burdened if that decision was taken at the time. And so he chose to err on the side of caution rather than saving the country from an imminent precipice. The incumbent from day one on the other side pulled the plug. He knows, of course, had a bit of knowledge of economics, but of course he had experts who would have advised him. They will definitely tell him the consequences of his policies, and they will also have told him the unintended consequences of his policies. And I must admit that the unintended consequences of his policies might not have been handled well. And I think my perspective aligned with what most economic analysts have actually said. Why we have had more resources now going to especially the state governments, who had now received multiples of what they usually earn before the removal of fuel subsidy. The federal government also had more resources, like the NOA had rightly highlighted. So on those sides, the policy had actually helped us because we are not borrowing. In fact, if there is anything, we have been able to offset marginally a percentage of our borrowing. The country is now in a better position when it comes to debt to GDP ratio.
But Mr. Shewa, on that, one question that comes to mind is this request from President Bola Ahmed Tinubu that's before the National Assembly for additional borrowing and also to include pension funds. I don't know what you make of it, because people are asking, if we've saved up this much, 84 billion naira, why isn't there an additional request from Mr. President on the table of the National Assembly?
I think they have issued clarification. Something that many people really don't know, and of course you won't blame them. Immediately that happened, I think one of the days on this show, I actually mentioned it, that the incumbent has by far the highest number of PR people on his team, but how well they've maximized that leaves a bit to be desired, especially in communicating economic policies of the government. Perhaps that will be in part shaped by the fact that I really, except for maybe someone in the vice president's office, who I'm trying to get his name now. It's my brother from Ado-Ekiti, who is a bit vast. He's an economist who is vast in economic issue, but I'm not sure he's actually part of the economic team when they are communicating economic policies to Nigerians. You see, there is something called the MTEF. Even before the budget is submitted, the MTEF, as it were, talks about the planned spending proposals of the government.
That's the medium-term expenditure framework.
Yeah, thank you so much. The medium-term expenditure framework. It precedes the budget. In fact, the budget actually gets its details from the underpinnings of the MTEF. So in the MTEF, the government will highlight a number of his strategic plans to support the budget that he plans to churn out, and is mandated to submit it to the National Assembly. It's after the National Assembly approves the MTEF that he now develops his budget from the plans in the MTEF. So if there are plans, of course, when the president read out the budget for year 2025, it was clear that it will not be financed 100% by our earning. There is a percentage of the budget that will come from borrowings, and that borrowings have already been captured in the MTEF. So it is just writing back, more like procedural, writing back to the National Assembly that what we capture in MTEF, that we are going to borrow in order to finance our budget, can you now give us the statutory approval? So many people had called it new borrowing. It's actually not a new borrowing, as it were. And during the presentation of the budget, it was clearly articulated that it's just about, I think it was 67% of the budget that will come from our earnings. The remaining 30-something%, we actually use borrowing. Now, on the part of using the money that have been saved, that's been a conversation for many years. Nigeria has resources from its deductions from pensions that have been lying fallow. So people are actually of the opinion that instead of leaving that resources, why not let's use it as a country to be a part of our infrastructural financing? All right, so that the same way the federal government issues bonds, issues debentures, and the rest of other paper money and pay back subsequently, why not do the same thing? Instead of going to borrow from foreign lenders, if you have money lying fallow somewhere, why not get approval? You can borrow from there. Since pension money is actually long-term money, you can also get long-term financing to help us as a country. And we are not actually doing anything that other nations don't do. Many nations of the world, it is the pool of resources like this that they use in financing long-term infrastructural development as a country.
Now, last year, there was also debates on the use of 20 trillion naira from the pension funds, and one of the most vocal voices in that direction was former Vice President Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, who talked about the threshold of that amount to be used on road projects. Now, and whilst there hasn't been much in terms of information from the president's PR team, this year again, it's on the concern that there's another request besides that 20 trillion that was to be used that's still being debated about. I don't know if there needs to be more effort on that part in terms of transparency and the use of those funds.
No, I don't think it's a matter of transparency. It's a matter of relativity. Don't forget that the highest budget that we had during Buhari, that was the final budget, was just a little above 3 trillion. But the budget of the current administration has actually doubled that. So when you talk about that volume of resources, you must also talk relatively. Like people are very quick to say, so administration did not give more than 200 billion to defense. 200 billion out of how much? All right, 200 billion out of 1 trillion is they are talking about 1/5 of the budget. All right, that is a huge amount. Now, if you now talk about 400 billion out of a 6 trillion budget, it's not up to 1/5. So that's what I meant by relativity. So sometimes this analysis, when you just mention amount like 10 trillion, you should ask yourself 10 trillion out of what, or relative to what. So in the past 2 years under Bola Ahmed Tinubu's regime, one of the things we experienced, and is actually not new, if you compare the population of our country, over 200 million persons, even our current budget is still very little. When you compare us to nations like South Africa, that is just 1/4 of our population. That tells you a whole lot. If you compare us to nations like Brazil, who of course have of course we will not mention US, they are the biggest in the world, but you can mention nations like Brazil and compare their budget with our own, you really know that we are doing very badly. So that's where people have actually been speaking. I love the analogy that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala used those days. At most times we are busy fighting over who gets what from a small cake, and all we just needed to do was to bake a larger cake. The moment you bake a larger cake, the chunk that goes to health, that goes to infrastructure like roads, like hospitals, will also naturally increase. So we need to earn more. If we earn more, we can have a bigger cake, and if we have a bigger cake, we have a bigger chunk of the cake going to the different sectors of the economy.
Now, Mr. Seun, why I asked about transparency is because of some of the issues cited by the former VP rather, where he said that by the extant regulations as provided by the PENCOM, only 5% of the total pension fund can be used for such initiatives. My question is, if we are saying that the government intends to use 20 trillion naira, do they also need to inform Nigerians on the total in terms of how much we have as pension funds?
I think the total amount we have as pension fund, even though I don't readily have the figure now, I don't think it's opaque. I followed PENCOM and its activities for a while. I think it's one of the most transparent bodies we have. Recently, it was not like that until recently. But I think I agree with Atiku Abubakar. If the PENCOM Act actually is very clear about 5%, if the government wants to get anything higher than that 5%, there are only I think there is only a single thing to do. Go back. Is the National Assembly that passed that act. It can be amended to have, like I mentioned before now, nations globally. You can mention Canada, the UK, the US itself, and several other nations. Their pension fund is one of the major pool for their development because it's usually very huge. It's a resources that is lying fallow, and you don't expect people to draw. You can actually have a more like a stochastic forecast of how much will be needed in the next 20 years from the pension fund. It's so easy. You know the number of persons, you know the resources they have, you know for how long they will require these resources. Some might not require the resources maybe in the next 20 years, like the people who just got employed between now and the next 10 years. They might not need that, all things being the same, for another 20 years, maybe 15 to 20 years. So that's why it's a ready pool of resources for financing long-term development, maybe development to 10, 15, 20 years. We go to international lenders, and they charge us very exorbitantly. So if we have that resources lying fallow somewhere, why not use it for our own development and pay back? You just make sure that you are not using it to pay salaries, you are using it to pay infrastructures that will be able to pay you back yield from its yield over time. And that's the right thing to do. But if there is an act in PENCOM, of course, I'm not versed about the PENCOM Act that actually places a limit, a ceiling on how much can be withdrawn from that fund, then it can be amended if there is a need to. But if that is not done, that itself is illegal, and the government have to be very careful, but tread cautiously, not to do anything illegally.
Well, in closing, we'll touch on one final subject before we let you go, and this is following comments by late General Sani Abacha's widow, Mariam Abacha, who has made headlines this morning saying that some of the money her husband saved for the country vanished shortly after he died. She has also refuted the claims made by IBB that her late husband annulled the June 12 elections. She said those two issues, to include the $5.12 billion famously called Abacha loot, has nothing to do with her late husband. What's your comments in reaction to this claims by Mariam Abacha?
Unfortunately, we found ourselves in a nation where we go about canonizing our criminals. If not, I don't see why the widow of someone like Sani Abacha will make headline for any good reason. He was trying to portray and present his late husband as a saint, and it's unfortunate that we had an administration who actually banished history from our books. It's one of the bad history we had in this country, and I wasn't too young when he was in power. I was already in secondary school, and we knew what happened, what transpired. And since then, all the loots that have been coming in, yeah, I agree with her that a number of these loots might have been relooted, but to now try to paint his husband as a saint, I think is unfortunate.
On relooted loots.
Yeah, relooted loot. Thank you so much. But to now try to paint his husband as a saint, I think is unfortunate. That's absolutely, I think, is an insult on our intelligence. Were the loot relooted? Definitely, they were. And the international intelligence clearly had showed us that they were relooted. But to come out and try to mask what the husband did is an unfortunate saga.
Now, for the first time in 26 years of civil rule, this year's June 12 commemoration has a different air to it, because this will be the first time that an open admittance on the June 12th annulment has been made. Do you think that in going forward, apart from the joint address of the National Assembly by the President, there has to be some commemorative significance to how this shapes conversations on Democracy Day in Nigeria going forward?
Yeah, I love the latter part, Brian. Go forward. I really don't see any milestone that is worthwhile, or rather, I'm not expecting any milestone that is worthwhile this year. Bear in mind the economics, which of course is the most important thing to the generality of Nigerians. We have seen significant improvement in our security, but as long as people go to sleep hungry, wake up hungry, and are not assured of where the next meal will come from, I think all that happened in June 12 and thereafter, it simply means we have not maximized its gains. But going forward, like you said, in the coming year, maybe 2-3 years from now, if we now have a better economy, we have security more moderated across the length and breadth of the country, we begin to see the hopes of Nigeria as the giant of Africa, then we can now say the bloods of the matters of June 12, all that they stood for, agitated for, was not a waste. I think that is my position on that.
Well, we must thank you, Mr. Seun Oni, for taking our time to grace the show this morning and lend your thoughts to the issues in the news.
Thank you so much, and it's always a privilege. Have a good day, sir.
You too, sir.